My name is Barika Poole, and I'm proud to be a part of Rock Blue, an international NGO focused on empowering water utilities to create healthy cities and improve lives. For more information, please check out our website at rockblue.org. Today's panel discussion will be a different format than we usually have, where our esteemed panelists will be role-playing and arguing a particular stance on our topic. The benefit of this is to get all the arguments out on the table and to provide a rich discussion and hopefully move us all forward to tackling these issues. Many of us are quite familiar with SDG6, but for those of you who aren't, by 2030, SDG6 seeks to ensure safe drinking water and sanitation for all, focusing on sustainable management of water resources, wastewater and ecosystems, and acknowledging the importance of an enabling environment. With that said, I am pleased to introduce our panel today representing some of the best known names in WASH. Joel Coker is a program manager of the World Bank's Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership. He will be playing the role of an NGO team leader who is seeking remarkable success by engaging more women in WASH in Asia. And he will be arguing that yes, SDG6 will succeed. Marika van Nooyd is the Regional Director, Asia, East and Southern Africa for World WaterNet. She will be playing the role of an administrator of a major international aid agency, seeing a large increase in her WASH budget for 2022, and she will also be arguing in the positive. Robert Gakupia is the director of Blackburn Associates. He will be playing the role of a multilateral development finance institution program manager who has large sums of money to spend on WASH, but few governments are willing or able to take on WASH loans. He is arguing in the negative. Nat Painter, independent international water sanitation and hygiene consultant. He will be playing the role of a large vendor of both at the tap water treatment devices, as well as medium scale packaging treatment plants, who sees great opportunity through the private sector to improve access to potable water. He will be arguing in the affirmative. Gisela Kaiser is the Vice President of Water Globe Consultants. She will be playing the role of a skeptical Minister of Water in Africa who is seeing little progress in her country's ability to provide water and sanitation for all. So she will be arguing in the negative. And Dr. William Muhari, founder of 2ML Consulting. He will be playing the role of a program officer of a large foundation that has invested millions in startup sanitation programs, but seeing little sustainability once the foundation's investments are no longer there. He will be arguing in the negative. And Cecile Labadori is the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector leader at SNV, and she will be playing the role of the CEO of a major professional organization attending to WASH who has plans to enact a major global program to significantly increase awareness and activity related to the SDG6, and she'll be arguing in the affirmative. So just so you know that we have encouraged our panelists to fully engage with one another and even argue. If you have any questions for any of our panelists, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen, not the chat button. We have reserved a bit of time at the end for the discussion questions from the audience, but in case we run out of time, the experts will respond to all questions in writing, which will be posted along with a recording of today's event on our website, rockblue.org, in about 2 weeks' time. I'd like to now ask the president of Rock Blue, Peter Macy, to say a few words.
On behalf of Rock Blue, I want to welcome our talented and highly accomplished expert panelists, as well as all the attendees from all over the globe. We've had about 400 registrants for this particular event, which is a testament to the 7 panelists and the acute interest by many in the subject of the success of SDG6.
So in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, countries have committed to engaging in systematic follow-up and review of progress towards the goals and targets using a set of global indicators. And here's a snapshot of where we currently stand according to the data provided to the UN. So let's jump right into the discussion and see if I can get Gisela to start us off by asking her, what do you think is the largest hurdle to overcome in achieving SDG6 by 2030?
So, Barika, this pretty much keeps me up at night. You know, when the SDGs were adopted by the UN in 2015, I was completely bought in that this is the route, the desirable future of the world. I was especially excited by the fact that water is so prominent. It's not only focused on water and sanitation, but SDG really connects all the goals of every geographic level through the economies, the ecosystems, as well as social systems in the world. But since then, I've recognized that there's just a significant gap between policy and implementation. This, of course, varies around the world. The world is not an equal place. But I really nailed it down to there being insufficient transparency. A lot of governments may be embarrassed that they're not achieving goals. And I don't believe that all countries are honest in how they report. Then there's a complete lack of accountability. There's so much to do that many people feel, so what? You can only do so much every day, every week, every month, every year. And water and sanitation just isn't sufficiently a priority up in the level where it needs to be. You know, I've been a minister and I fight for budget, but there are always other things that come into it. And water and sanitation, even if it's such a basic human right, it's pushed to the back burner. We need more of society to be engaged with it. It has to, it really requires stakeholder participation at every level. But when I look at the world with social media, people are just becoming more and more selfish. And as long as I'm okay, Jack, I don't really care about anybody else. But mostly, especially in the country where I live, there is a lack of capacity. There's a lack of skilled resources to implement, and there's a lack of financial resources. Things are not cheap. So in all, we're wholly insufficient in managing to design and implement our solutions, even just in my country. What is required at a rural level versus what is required at an urban level is really difficult to design and implement at scale. So I've been working in this space now where the rubber hits the road for a long time, and it just isn't working. Thanks, Barika.
Gisela. Any of our other panelists would like to respond to Gisela?
Yes, please. Dear Minister, thank you very much for your intervention, but I'm afraid I disagree, actually. And as CEO of the International Association of Water and Sanitation Operators, I do think that if we work together and if we get the sufficient involvement of the government and of different ministries, we can achieve the goals of WASH SDGs. I think you really you highlighted a very important thing, which is the lack of capacity. And I think it's really important that ministries and governments understand the importance of investing in capacity building, in education, and not only at higher level, for university level, which of course is very important, but also for all the vocational training. So as CEO of the International Association, I really urge you to collaborate with your education stakeholders and to invest sufficient funds into capacity building of all the technical staff, the utility managers, and all the support staff that will make possible to achieve the WASH SDG6. Thank you.
And I think that is where the problem is in terms of reaching the SDGs. I do not, you really cannot do things in a vacuum. Apart from having the SDG targets, to a large extent, implementation of the SDGs was also supposed to be accompanied by widespread and deep-seated reforms. Those reforms are not happening. So it doesn't matter how much capacity you build. There are some reforms that are needed to be done, and they should be led by government. The problem I see is, and where I start, because I have a lot of money in terms of supporting investment, supporting development, you cannot, it's not a problem of money. Because if you bring in as a problem of money, then everybody thinks about infrastructure. Meeting SDGs is not about infrastructure. As much as that infrastructure is important, it's about government leadership, which I do not see. If there is no government leadership, government knows that they need to reform itself, yet it cannot even support budget-wise that reform. That reform has to still come, support has to come from outside. Then are we really serious in terms of SDGs or water and sanitation being a priority within our countries? I don't think we are. And I really do not see these SDGs succeeding no matter how much money you have. Thank you.
Robert, I see a more nuanced approach to this, where I think that these processes can move in parallel. For my company, Wash Inc., we are a supplier of water, sanitation, and hygiene equipment, as well as small treatment facilities. And I just think that the policy process is going to take too long, and we don't have that time. But I think I'm very glad that you're representing a large investor, because we should talk, because I could use some investment to build out the water systems. And then in parallel, the policy process can move forward. And then similarly around the capacity, we are eager for capacity, and we are a job-making machine between our manufacturing capabilities, our distribution, our warehousing, our training, our sales forces. Very excited to work to build out the service level, not just the infrastructure. Fully agree, it's not about the infrastructure. It's really about making sure there's a quality service. I frankly see a lot of opportunity here in SDG6 and look forward to convincing those of you who are more cynical about it that I think this is where there's a real opportunity here that we can pursue and work together towards. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, because of course there are major challenges. I mean, we all know them and they were already on the table. But look at where we were 9 years ago. We still, if we look at the SDGs in 2030, we have 9 more years to go. We are cooperating much more. But look at what's happening in civil society. Compare it to the climate awareness. So many more talented people are aware of what needs to happen on water and sanitation, and they will all work together. So even in capacity development, in innovation, technologies, sharing information, sharing data, we will make major leaps in the coming years. And in the end, we will have to make it. We will adjust because there will be more challenges, like COVID came as a new challenge, but we will manage because of the globalization, and we will be all working together.
That pushes and fosters women's role in this sector, in WASH in particular. I really want to stress the point that others have made, that it's about leadership. I think we can do this, and I think there's evidence recently, even very recently, on how this is happening. What's going on in terms of climate change and the awareness of that, even over the last 6 months, has been certainly remarkable. What's happened over the last 18 months in terms of the vaccine for the pandemic has also been nothing short of remarkable. Rollout is a different issue, but in 1918, the pandemic was lingering for 4 or 5 years. Within 18 months, we were able to come up with a vaccine. But more importantly, maybe is the energy sector. We need to look at another sector. Their technology, money, resources, and political will have been the dominant feature in turning that around. Now, when I talk about leadership, I really want to focus on something that I think is very important. It's not just leadership, it's the right kind of leadership. And I really want to stress that one area that we need to work on is bringing women more involved into this sector. So we know women are the primary people who are responsible for bringing water in most contexts. In Yemen, 84% of household members who fetch water are women. Women take care of sick children. We know that men and women have different motivations, and we see in leadership roles where women are legislatures and ministers, there's much more emphasis and much more priority not on providing water, but implementing those projects to move forward. Some other characteristics that also I think are worth noting is women's role not only in water, but also in sanitation. Women are impacted more severely by the lack of sanitation, by menstrual facilities and equipment, and overall I think we not only need more leadership in this sector, and we've seen how leadership works elsewhere in other sectors, but we need more women involved in this sector. Thank you.
Yes, as I was saying, I am a small program officer, but I manage a huge amount of money. And we've already dispersed a lot of money to many institutions which are dealing with water. But we don't see any use, we don't see the output out of it. Money is disappearing. I don't know how we're going to cope with this, what you would call governance, corruption. You put in the money, a lot of it goes in, but we don't see any output. So I think we have problems convincing my institution that we should continue putting in money because we don't see what comes out of it at the end of it. Much of it is stolen. So, Honorable Minister, I think I do agree with you, and we have to put mechanisms in place to make sure that the money we provide is actually used for the purpose. Because at the moment, the money we are putting in the systems, we don't see it at all. So I don't know. I think it's just a game. I don't think we shall be able to achieve our SDGs if we continue behaving the way we are behaving, if we are not able to put proper governance systems in place that can really help in making sure that the money we put in is used for the purpose.
Yeah, maybe William, because I really hear what you say, and I forgot to introduce myself, but I'm from an international aid agency and we are investing, we have a large increase in our budget, as Barika said. We are also investing in better data and information sharing. I already mentioned it. And we are definitely there to help you because this is indeed crucial. And you see it more and more that institutions, organizations working on SDG6 share their knowledge and make it available for everyone working on it. And this is one of the drivers of real change, that also scholars, educational institutes have access to this data. We're talking much more on integrated water resource management. All users need access to the same data. And we're happy to help also your organization to get better access to data. Sometimes it is difficult to really list the achievements, but we will get there all together.
If I may, just William, my problem is kind of on the opposite scale of being able to, or seeing value for money. Due to large-scale corruption in my country over the past decade or so, our compliance legislation has clamped down so much that it is virtually impossible to do anything, to procure anything, to deliver any type of infrastructure. So one can solve that with ever tightening regulations and so on. Somehow those people who steal will continue stealing. But it really creates a huge problem when you can't, even if you get the funding, if you can't deliver it. This is also, Cecilia, I think you spoke about building the capacity and dealing with the institutions. The people who deliver this kind of project are held so accountable for what they do and for tiny mistakes that they make. They are exiting their fields of expertise in their droves because just the stress about it is just so huge. And these are just kind of small local problems that are affecting my country. Then somebody mentioned that we are living in a global village and that is increasing our chances of getting this right. If COVID has done anything, it certainly has reduced people's lives and everybody seems to be so much more inwardly focused. COVID also stripped us from so much of our revenue during the height of it, and who knows when there'll be another wave or not. And then just finally, in my country, women are in positions of leadership all over the show, but there's a lack of respect at a fundamental society level. If you look at the statistics of violence against women and children, it makes me feel that as a minister, I'm merely a figurehead because there is no real respect for women's life. And this is not just in my country, it is throughout Africa and many areas of the world, which is just why we continue fighting this fight, and we want for SDG6 and the other 16 to succeed. But the obstacles that we face, we haven't as a world figured out how to really overcome that I have any sense that we are going to get there in only 9 years. Thanks, Barika.
It's very easy to convince voters to vote in somebody if you use the water and sanitation agenda. What bothers me is what happens once you get the political leadership. Water and sanitation disappears from the agenda. So for me, this is basically rhetoric, and you cannot continue funding rhetoric. You have to fund programs that are delivering to the people within an institutional framework and an institutional structure that makes sustainability meaningful. Because if there is no institutional structure, then we don't have to talk about sustainable development goals. We can talk about getting people water, but whether or not they will have water the next day, we are really not sure without actually putting in a non-capital investment in there. But that is why I believe the policy level is the leadership. I do not see the leadership coming from there. I agree with some of my panelists about the leadership role women play and even the utility. But when you look at the utility, if there is something we have learned during this 2-year COVID period, is basically the centrality of the utility in trying to address public health emergencies. But we are still not able to actually come up with a program to support the utility, because that is where you start. You want to find out whether your utility has a 2030 program. If the utility doesn't have, then there is a problem. But most utilities have. But when you ask them, the problem is that the government is not supporting us. The government is not doing this and this. And when you look at it, actually the government can do, if only they were to put in order their subsidy policy. For example, what money should fund what? Because this is one of the problems I have. I do not want to bring in program money to fund O&M, for example. And this is something we forget all the time. I want to bring in money that can fund expansion of coverage. While the utility can be able to fund O&M, the utility can also enhance its own self-financing to actually leverage on more money to expand coverage. And the utility can also fund continued functionality of the system. If we are not able to bring that together, then I think we are just, I have no hope of even meeting these goals even by 2040 or 2050. In fact, if you look at the money we need in my country, the gap has been talked about, a very big gap every year. But now studies are coming up, they are ongoing. That gap is actually increasing, and I agree with the minister, sometimes there needs to be honesty in this kind of data and whatever. That gap is much more than what it was thought about 7 years ago. So how are we going to fund it if we are not ready as a government to actually increase our own public funding even before we go for international funding? We won't, and we can't meet these goals at that pace. The data we are getting from JNP and UN WHO monitoring program is that if we have to meet these goals for basic service, we have to double the rate of progress. For safely managed, because the SDG introduces very high standards, we have to increase the progress 4 times. Politically, I don't see that happening. I'm sorry. Thank you.
In actual fact, I am surprised because my program, I'm dealing with a minister who is a man, and things are not getting on much better. When I had the lady minister saying that women are not respected, I got really more surprised because I thought from Joe Cocker, the head of the NGOs, he was mentioning that ladies are really playing a big role in this business. But now, you see, if women are themselves thinking that they are not being respected well enough, and I'm dealing with a man in my program and things are also not moving, so where are we going? So please, I don't think this thing would happen. We are just wasting money. If we can't trust the men themselves, and now we are also not trusting women, so where are we? Whom are we going to trust? This SGD is going to fail, certainly.
Thanks, William. Let me jump in and respectfully address the points that the minister raised and the challenge that she raised. I acknowledge them. Issues around data, capacity, and corruption are all there, but they're all there in other sectors that are making significant reforms and making progress. And we have an obligation. In many countries, there's a universal declaration around the accessibility of water. And water is a growing priority. If anything, climate has shown us that. So what we need to do is double down, and as was said earlier by Robert, we need the political leadership. And it happens in other sectors. We've seen good examples around the world, even in the last couple of years. And we have to raise the profile and not retreat and not give up and not just acknowledge that we're not going to reach this goal. As someone mentioned, there's still 8 or 9 years remaining. Some of these are within achievement. The water goal is about 70-75%. Sanitation is a bigger challenge. We have to double down on that and really move there. But overall, I think we need to not retreat, not throw our hands up, not give up, but instead reinforce all the challenges that you've said here. But there are ways to address these. We're not looking for major forms of new technology. The private sector is ready to step in. We know that. We know what the policies and laws and regulations need to be. We know community involvement, more gender-sensitive involvement is needed here. So this is not a sector like we're trying to get to a new planet. We know what we need to do. We have a responsibility in the sector, particularly the political leadership, to step up and really address this challenge. Thank you.
I agree with Joel. I think now is really the time to lean into the opportunities that we see here in the WASH sector. I think many of the issues that have been raised are really chances to build out market systems that will help make this a more viable sector. So as Robert mentioned, the role of the water utility as a response during COVID-19 is exactly the right approach forward, where we see how a functioning utility can really help reduce the impacts of a global pandemic or a local epidemic. And we're only going to see more of these in the future. So this is really an opportunity to build out these systems, invest in them, so that we can reduce the cost of these impacts later. Climate change is another one. Again, a global existential crisis, but is really also a global opportunity to help mitigate the impacts of climate change in the WASH sector. And I think, as Joel mentioned, the private sector is ready to help out on this and to build out the systems, the monitoring systems, as the Honorable Minister mentioned, so we have greater accountability and transparency, capacity building, the boosting on gender equity. 70% of the staff in my organization are women. So there's a real chance here to level the playing field, but it's really, we've got to step forward quickly and aggressively on this. I agree, government leadership is key, but we can't wait for this. This is not a sequential process, but rather this is a parallel process that we can move forward on the system development as well as strengthening the government responsibility at the same time. Thank you.
Please let me mention something that I disagree a little bit with, especially about what you said, Mr. Gakupia. I think that financial organizations and donors in general are sometimes very hard with water and sanitation utilities and are very demanding. There are principles that are set in stone. For example, that operation and maintenance should be solely covered by tariffing. And we know it takes time. So generally, when a water treatment plant is built or a wastewater treatment plant is built, it is expected right from the start, right from the next year, that O&M should be covered by tariffing. It's always expected that the donors will fund all the facilities about the public segment up to the control box, and that households or local government will always be responsible to bring their own funds to connect. In the end, we see that a lot of money is spent on building infrastructure, but in fact that this infrastructure is not always sustainable, and the issue is exactly operation and maintenance. In developed countries, in the past, we have seen that subsidies exist, whether they are direct or indirect, hidden or not hidden. But there's no acceptance that water or sanitation utilities built with public funds would then just fail. So I really think that donors also should review their point of view on what they fund. And maybe sometimes change the paradigm or leave the principle aside and to focus on the sustainability. The importance is that water utilities and would become sustainable, let's say within 5 years or 10 years, but in any case, they have to be operating. We cannot continue with having graveyards of investment, which in spite of all our collective efforts still do happen. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for the Honorable Minister, Gisela. I'm still thinking about your indication of all the difficulties, and because our agency is considering coming to your country, and as I said, we have a huge increase in budget. If we would sit around the table, how would your country be best helped with achieving the SDG6? What would you do if you get some financial support?
Thank you, Marika. I'm very excited to hear that. So also building on what Cecile said, our predicament is often that people are willing to offer us loan funding for CapEx. The reporting requirements are generally incredibly onerous, but one can understand that people want to be able to say that they funded and that there was value for money. But in paying back money in a country as unequal as mine is, there are so few people who contribute, who can afford to pay for basic services and are willing to pay for basic services. Unfortunately, water for a very long time, water and sanitation and waste was just seen as something that everybody should be entitled to. So it's very difficult to come up with a true cost. As a result, the tariff structures are heavily subsidized, and building infrastructure and getting CapEx is generally not as big a problem as being able to pay it back. As you are saying, from an aid agency, free money we will welcome with open arms, and we are happy to report until the cows come home on free money. Grant funding is really what makes the difference, and the reporting requirements should be able to prove that we really get good use of it. If we don't have to go through a system of our procurement, which if grant funders pay for it, as long as the design's up to our standards, we would absolutely welcome that. It really is just that often it's not just the infrastructure, it is the social cohesion that is required. And a lot of you have said it's the political leadership. You know, I'm not sure how I ended up in this job. I think if I had a choice again, I would choose to be, I don't know, a movie star, an artist or something that is just happier. There are so many competing demands on our every cent, on our every hour. It is just so difficult. Even if there's all the political will in the world, in a country, the competing priorities are difficult to resolve. And just often, because there are so many goals, water and sanitation doesn't always get what it needs. And we need to also focus on society and get society to work with us and not just want all the time. So Marika, I'm so looking forward to engaging with you on projects to further this goal, but I'm still not convinced.
Can I just jump in on the minister's point? You know, I hate to keep looking at other sectors, but we've heard the same thing about the energy sector for years. It's too expensive, there was too much corruption, the policy environment wasn't right, and data wasn't there. And yet, with real political will, that sector has turned around. And I just find it very difficult to, yes, there are certain countries where it's a challenge, and I acknowledge that. Okay, and you know, it's very difficult to make statements in the global context. But certainly, with the amount of policy change, the increase in tariffs, people have demonstrated a willingness to pay. They have covered their O&M costs for the most part, which are significantly more expensive. There's also tools and techniques that have been used to draw down those costs for the poor. And we've seen this happen. And it's very difficult to understand, particularly from a political leader, how you can turn around and say, well, it's worked with energy for the most part around the world, and yet we haven't been able to achieve the same objective in the water sector. Water is different, I acknowledge that. In many ways, it's more critical, it's central. But I think we really need to acknowledge that there has been significant change in other sectors. And the challenges that have been cited here today are the same challenges that many of those other sectors have faced. So we need to step it up. We need to acknowledge these challenges. We need to come together. The different communities that are represented here sometimes aren't always on the same page. We need to collaborate and coordinate better. But I think it's very clear that it's very clear to us where we're in communities and we're seeing the role that local leadership and community participation can play, and a real willingness to make those changes can have dramatic effect and really bring water to a universal standard that we're all looking for. And I need to say, sorry, water and sanitation. That's very important. Thanks.
Honourable Minister, I have a question to you also. My organization gets a lot of money from government and many other stakeholders, but we have our interests. Is it possible if I brought money to you, could guarantee that you could employ some of our people? Certainly want to make sure that the money we give you somehow comes back to us. I mean, look, we are not going to spoon feed you. You have to reach a stage where you can do things yourself. But my organization is of the view that if you could also maybe guarantee some few jobs for our people from my country, then we could give you a lot of money. How is that possible, Honourable Minister?
So thank you, William, for that question. In the past, we have engaged in such agreement that we would, for example, send skills to your country and you would send skills back to our country. Some of them in the past have worked out quite well, but in a lot of them, we felt we had our fingers burnt and things didn't work out as they were supposed to. Personally, I am all for looking at the world from a global view. We are all on this planet, and it shouldn't, it should be give and take, nothing at the other person's expense. So I'm not going to tell you outright that it's not an option, but it's something that we'll have to look at carefully. We are trying to develop our own skills internally in our country, and where we feel that we have gaps, where we can't fill those gaps sufficiently quickly, especially in experienced places, we are certainly open to looking at that. I just want to come back to Joel, and I hear your point, and I realize that the energy sector has made significant gains around the world over the past decade or so. Unfortunately, my country is a poor example of this, so it's a little bit difficult for me to assess. But my country is not necessarily on the lower scale of income or development index, and my sense is just that this is a big world we live in, and the 200 odd countries that we have are at such different scales of equality and development, which makes me really worried about it, because I really hope that my country would have achieved more by now, and we haven't, and I know that we are not necessarily underachieving. So I would love to engage more with you on the countries where all of these wonderful things have in fact worked, because there's just something holding us back. If I can give a small example, we, just as many countries around the world, have lots of informal settlements where people live in informal housing, but people are not in need specifically of water and sanitation. We provide and we aim for coverage. People want dignity and jobs and housing. So water and sanitation is perhaps something at a technical level that you can provide, but to provide well-located housing close to economic opportunities is a completely different challenge. And it means that you can invest all your energy and your money into providing taps and toilets, but you haven't even come close to addressing the problem. And when you do this, there is a complete lack of ownership. So there's vandalism, which means that you invest your millions and the infrastructure a month or so later is no longer working. So it would be good, and we have tried to learn from other countries as well, but we haven't found anything that absolutely works here.
Can I just ask a follow-on question, make a statement, and then a follow-on point? Look, we know the country you're in well, and at one point in the not too distant future, you had some of the cheapest power in the world and had very extensive coverage. There's a lot of debate about what's happened in the power sector, and I don't want to go there in detail, but it's very clear that there is a governance issue. We know from your renewable power programs, for example, you were able to secure $20 billion worth of investment in 5 years. So if the right policy environment, I think that what that teaches us for the water sector is if there's political will, there's the right policy environment, we can come together with a partnership and address this. What I find challenging on your position, however, is all these challenges, the answer seems to be to throw up the hands and say, we can't do this. We can't do this. And we know from other parts in Africa and elsewhere, certainly in Asia where I work, where there have been real political changes and real political will, and increases the level of water and sanitation have in fact been achieved. So yes, I appreciate that it can be difficult, but particularly as a political leader, I think you have an obligation to step up and be a champion for this rather than pointing out all the various challenges, which I acknowledge are there. And we can certainly help, and that involves more engagement from women at all levels of government and the community. Thanks.
I would really like to react as well. When you say that people don't need water and sanitation, they need dignity. Well, I think it's essential to the dignity of people to have proper toilets and to have access to water for their own hygiene. And also, I don't think it's really right to say that, well, we've provided the infrastructure to people and then it was vandalized. I find it very disturbing to say that poor people, slum dwellers who don't have access, it's their fault. So I'm really disturbed by that. And I do believe maybe governments sometimes have a very top-down approach, and working together with professional associations, with NGOs and civil society organizations would certainly ensure more ownership from the communities to take care of the facilities that are built. So I would say in that case, there's really an issue with the approach and maybe where the money is spent. So this is my point of view.
I would like to make a link to vandalism, from vandalism to something that Robert said before, because it is about operation and maintenance, and that you're not so interested in supporting that. Because from an earlier program that we had as the International Aid Agency, we learned that there's so many investment potential in operation and maintenance, and that's often forgotten, and it's such low-hanging fruit. So Robert, would you consider contributing there to support the achievement of the SDGs?
If I could come in, I think if I get your concern correctly, you see, it's not just about subsidy or subsidizing O&M and all that. What I'm looking for is, even where subsidy is required, it is so clear to whoever you discuss with or whoever you present with that there is subsidy required here. If we do not have a proper program, a proper strategy of actually delivering water and sanitation to people, and then we agree on what kind of infrastructure and what will mean to maintain that infrastructure, then I think we are just acting in an ad hoc way. My problem is, and I did not say that you don't subsidize. Yes, you subsidize, but subsidy forever for O&M is not sustainable. You subsidize by even linking that subsidy to the performance of your infrastructure, so that you know if really it has to have a forever subsidy, then maybe that was the wrong infrastructure in the first place. Perhaps you shouldn't have started with it. And this is where we have a problem. I know that somebody mentioned about political will and all that. When you are not very clear on your sector development model, even professionals become also disillusioned. So even when I discuss with them in terms of the money that is needed to implement programs, they are not very confident is what they want to implement. And they hang on the politicians, and the politicians we always throw you under the bus when it comes to when push comes to a shove, because you are the technical advisor. So when you have that double tragedy of politicians and professionals not having the right will that is required, then you have a very big problem. And that is where I'm coming from when I look at what we need to actually implement the water and sanitation programs and do strategies that are required to meet the SDG6. I am yet to be convinced. Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree, for example, with Nate that the policy process can take forever, maybe, but without a robust policy process that also understands that people do not drink the policy, they drink water and they get the sanitation service, then we will be lost, because there is no way a poor person will accept that they don't have water and sanitation service because there is no policy. So that means you have to take the two together and try as a government understand that policy process is important, in as much as also service provision is important, which is basically supported by that policy process. Without that understanding, without very clear strategies and whatever, we can continue putting in goals. After 2030, we'll set others, but we'll never reach them without understanding really the basics that are required. I mean, water and sanitation is about living a dignified life. Why is it so difficult to convince any government that their citizens need a dignified life? And a dignified life means that water and sanitation is part of the common goods to allow the citizens to live a dignified life. I don't understand why that is so difficult.
But please let me react. I think there are different things. First, we don't ask financial institutions and donors to provide subsidies for O&M forever. We just ask them to consider that it just takes time, maybe a couple of years for the utilities or even private sector stakeholders to become viable and sustainable. But then subsidies forever. Well, what about energy? What about the carbon-based energy? What about the fertilizers in all the countries where it's subsidized forever? So by keeping this principle, it should not be subsidized, then it will fail forever. It will not be operated and maintained forever. So I think we should review also our position. Of course, the objective is not to just throw money out of the window through subsidies. It's not. We need to ask the operators for accountability. We need to ask them for transparency in the way they work. But also, if we also consider that the government is thinking that access to water and sanitation is a human right, just as education, for example, then it's also important that when the sector is sometimes failing, then the government should fit in and provide subsidies whenever it's needed. I think the governments do provide subsidies for private sectors, private interest, and it should be very important that the water and sanitation and hygiene sector are also supported.
But governments should not provide blind subsidies, opaque subsidies. They should provide subsidies when they have fully diagnosed the situation. I've always asked the partners who I work with, why is it so easy to actually support the energy sector? I've never gotten a straight answer. So I always ask myself, what is so strange with the water and sanitation sector that it doesn't really attract support yet it is so basic, even for life? I don't know. I have never gotten a straightforward answer. Maybe the minister can tell us why it is so difficult for politicians to put in, but I understand the minister's frustration in this respect.
But I think the subsidy discussion has to be more nuanced. I don't think we're, to steal from Water for People's slogan, everyone forever. It's not subsidies for everyone forever. The subsidies need to be well targeted. And there's certainly areas where the private sector can come in and have a sustainable service to certain areas of utilities and to the high density areas, the areas where there's a stronger market in place. And then there is a role for a subsidy for perhaps forever, but certainly for a long time in the rural areas, the areas where the financial viability will just never be achieved. But there is that need for the dignity of WASH, but as well as the economic returns on WASH that you see throughout the world that justify such an investment. I think there needs to be real clarity when we talk about subsidies for whom, for when, and for how long. And it's not going to be the whole country, but the subsidy pot is small and finite. It needs to be well directed and can look to private sector to contribute their part and for households to contribute their part as well to help make this all a viable engine of progress. Over.
This is the point I said. I said earlier that what money funds what. That's really about subsidy. If you have subsidy money, what should it fund? We need to be very clear on what subsidy funds. Otherwise, then we'll just be going around problems. Because public money, it should be very transparent, very accountable in a way that it is known that it is funding what. So that when you are coming to me for more money, you are not always coming to me for subsidy. I don't expect that. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that should be, but you are coming to me to fund a very clear targeted areas. And you're also coming to me when you know that you have a full diagnosis of the problem and you know how you are going to get out of that problem. My money, of course, being part of the assistance to get out of this problem.
Robert, in your investments, you look for the business case that, say, companies might be doing, saying we will need operating support for 12 months or so. And then after that, we'll become fully financially viable. Is that an area that you press your grantees or investors on?
Exactly. That's really part of what I'm talking about. Yeah.
If I can just come in here, I have to correct what Cecile interpreted. I'm not saying that people don't want taps and toilets. Of course, WASH is absolutely critical to human life and dignity and everything else. I'm just saying it's not enough. It's not necessarily the solution that people want. So in my country, we have spent so much money on providing taps and toilets, and they are vandalized because people want more than that. They want housing opportunities and job opportunities. They want a better life than what I can contribute to in terms of the WASH sector. Second thing I just want to mention in subsidies, from my experience, because electricity is more expensive, electricity is generally more respected. I can't generate my own. You know, you have to be quite clever to figure out how to use sunlight and turn it into something I can plug my cell phone in. Whereas people see water in rivers and it looks simple. So historically, and even now still, water is a lot cheaper than electricity is. So the subsidization model varies. In my country, far more than half of people do not pay for water and sanitation. So there's only a fairly small proportion of people paying for this service. And with water scarcity and climate change, it is becoming more expensive. And it is difficult to, amongst all the other burdens that people need to pay for, to be able to make a financial model work, which is why grant funding and grant funding without strings attached is an absolute first prize for me. And then Joel, you did mention that as a minister, I need to be positive and enthusiastic about it. And I believe I am, but unlike most ministers, I'm trying to be 100% transparent and honest here. Most ministers will tell you that their country will achieve the goal. I am being honest by saying that I don't think my country will, and looking at the world, I don't think the rest of the world or much of the world will either.
Can I jump in and ask a follow-on question? What are the things that you as the minister in your power, as the leader in government, or in the water sector, what are the things that you can do to help achieve the goal? Given all the challenges that you've highlighted, I mean, you're arguably in one of the most powerful positions there is to reach SDG6. And while I hear the negative aspects of it, I'm struggling to understand where you see the opportunity, or as opposed to just throwing our hands up and giving up. Thanks. And I'm sorry.
I'm kind of looking at my colleagues on the panel to maybe give me a little bit of time to formulate that question, for even though I live and breathe this every day, it is difficult to come up with 3 points that I can just tell you, because if it was easy, I would have done it. But it is the mere load of everything that goes wrong every day and all the challenges I face that makes that a difficult question to answer. So I am going to ask for your indulgence and for maybe a different topic to be spoken about a little while. I think we still have time, so I shall try to configure my thoughts.
Yeah, maybe to drop something, because of course I'm really positive that we're going to achieve this all together, as I said before. But we as an international agency, we're also struggling because we want to contribute to not only handing out free money, so we're moving towards more blended finance, and we're practicing with attracting private money, going to the capital market. But so far not with success. Of course, we're learning a lot, which we're happy to share. And maybe it is because we're large, but not that large. So we are also working with utilities who then are waiting a bit for where do we get the freest money, or where do we work with us. But then there are strings attached, as Gisela formulated it. So I just wanted to ask to you, like, how do we improve that if we still all want to achieve the SDG6 and we want to attract more or optimize finance? How can we better work together?
maybe,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
yeah, I was gonna offer to help out the minister. I'm just the lonely head of a small NGO in Asia. But if someday I aspired to be the minister, I could think of 3 things that I think we need to do, and someone in a leadership position really needs to take on. I think first of all, I think we have to look at the collaboration and the consistency with all of the partners involved in this, in the country that I'm working. We have a lot of inconsistency and a lot of different priorities amongst the various players. And I think it's important as the minister, if I was the minister, to bring everyone together and really identify what those priorities are and look at the consistency of those. Second one is the one that I've mentioned the most, is this advocacy and leadership role. I think we have to make people understand the value of water and why it is a priority, how it impacts not just on gender, but education, health. It was very disappointing to see during the pandemic, one of the 2 ways to respond to this before we had the vaccine was washing hands. We saw the health people able to secure resources quite extensively. And then when we were talking to water utilities, they were talking about laying off people and cutting services, which was exactly what we didn't need to do to combat the pandemic. So I really think at the political leadership level, this idea of advocacy and consensus building, and as I said, leadership is quite critical. And then, we've talked a lot about money here, but I think money is just one aspect of it, rationalizing the policy framework. We know what the policies that need to be in place are. We know what the subsidies should be focused on. We know what the long-term goals. We see successfully operating water systems, even in emerging markets, that have been in place and functioning for years. So this isn't a mystery. I think we've identified and know what that framework should look like. But as a political leader, I would hope I would have the scope and the patience and the ability to bring together the various partners to really understand what that framework looks like in a non-political fashion and really take it on, recognizing all the other priorities that are there, recognizing the challenges around corruption and other things. But this has been done. This is not a goal that isn't being achieved elsewhere in the world. We know what to do. And I think as political leaders, and we've seen political leaders all across emerging markets, which have in fact taken this on. So I would focus on those 3 things as priorities if I was ever in charge and moved on from my current position, which I love, heading a women's NGO working in the WASH sector. Thanks.
If I could come in just briefly, because we must work together in all this. And that working together also needs to be supported through resources. But I think, and I don't know, I cannot overemphasize on the government leadership and the political leadership. If it is partnerships, it is governments that facilitate partnerships. Partnerships which the government is not part of it do not work. And this is what happens in water and sanitation. Because, for example, sanitation, we cannot give a sewer or off-site sanitation to everybody to reach the SDG 25. We can't. That means we have to agree that we have to do a lot of on-site sanitation. And what is the problem with on-site sanitation is how you manage the sludge, because it can mess up whatever other gains you can bring up. That can be managed by a change of mindset. That sludge is not waste. It's also a resource. And it is only the private sector, in my view, that has the capacity to do this innovation in turning that waste into a resource. Governments must accept this, because in government, the functionaries out there in government are not really good at operational issues. They like a lot about policy, but they are not really good at operational issues and trying to bring in innovation. That is where the public sector can add value. That is where partnerships can add value, but with government leadership. Because I always see partnerships in the power sector happen very fast. Why do they happen very fast? Yet in the water sector, there is always either a problem, there is no politician who wants to be associated with the rise in water tariff, for example, Why? Yet we know that this is what we need for us to even talk about sustainable water service. So those partnerships have to be strengthened, and we have to understand that water or wastewater is not necessarily wastewater. Sludge is not necessarily waste. It is also a resource. And I've seen quite a number of innovations happening in countries. William, my colleague, knows we have talked about a lot about governance, because this is also an area which I work a lot. And I'm happy that I've seen in the Q&A about water integrity. Water integrity is also something else. And I believe all of us, if you haven't, you should actually look at the Water Integrity Global Outlook for 2021 report. It gives us a lot of food for thought in terms of how we handle the water sector. That way, then, when we have a common understanding, then I think working together then has quite a bit of meaning in terms of trying to meet the aspirations of our people. Without that, and without government leadership, then I'm afraid I don't think we are going anywhere. Yes, we can reach somewhere. We are aiming for the sun. Perhaps we can reach closer to the moon, but I don't see us reaching those goals which we have set ourselves.
By the way, Honourable Minister, I don't have to despair, because although my organization still thinks that there's a lot of work to be done, I have visited a few countries, and I have found a few utilities doing very, very well. And I have found some of them with very, very good capacities, very good engineers, very good accountants. And I've even found that they have even frameworks, enabling frameworks that have managed to, sustain their operations. So I think, Honourable Minister, you don't have to despair. Although I know there's a lot of work to be done, I think with maybe political awareness, maybe education, maybe even using the NGOs to enlighten the people about how we can go about the business, I think there is still some future for our sector. So, Honourable Minister, don't give up. I think you still have a lot of things to do, but I think there's some light beyond the tunnel. So don't give up, Honourable Minister.
I think these conversations provide us hope on how we can work together and support each other in order to achieve the goals. So yes, as you rightly mentioned, some utilities are doing very well. And as an association of water and sanitation professionals, I would really like to encourage the aid sector and NGOs to support us in establishing partnerships and twinnings, mentor and mentees systems, so that there can be capacity building between the different water and sanitation utilities. Also, I think it's very interesting what our colleague mentioned about fecal sludge that can be a resource and not a waste. And I do believe that for this we also need NGOs, research institutions to ignite and open the mind and provide the awareness that actually it's not waste and it can be a resource. And we also need the support of governments in terms of the regulatory framework, because most of the time we have to prove, once again, that 1 + 1 = 2. We have to prove that it's possible to reuse fecal sludge, that composting is safe, and that it's possible to fertilize trees and fields and forests by using this. So I think we do really need to work together for that. Now, about the role of the government, I also find that there's an important role for the government in terms of stability and also in terms of being our first customer. Very often the government and NGOs will encourage households and put all the burden on households to increase access to water and sanitation, while so many schools, hospitals, and public buildings are themselves not connecting or not paying their water and sanitation fees regularly. So I think it's also very important. Just imagine if in one country all the schools had standardized septic tanks which are waterproof and with secondary treatment, or if all the schools, hospitals, public buildings would connect and pay their fee regularly to the water and sanitation utilities, that would build up the market. I think we shouldn't forget that B2B or B2 government is also very important, and that the WASH SDGs cannot be achieved only by relying on customers.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, for assisting there. And, you know, these are naturally the things that I've been practicing, because I believe that you need to transform people to bring them onto your side, and you can only do so by collaboration and being consistent, by advocating what is right, and by leading people. And our policy framework, I don't believe our policy framework is bad compared to other countries who we have benchmarked against. So perhaps it's a case of political maturity, and perhaps, thank you, William, for the encouragement. Perhaps my sense of impatience is hampering me, because perhaps success is just around the corner, following the priorities, which from a political leadership viewpoint, perhaps it will pan out. Politics is such that it's a bit of a dog-eat-dog world, and you are measured on annual targets and measurements. So there are things that have less to do with general transformation and changing people's minds about valuing water. That is not necessarily something that you could easily measure, but it is super important. When it comes to innovation, Robert first mentioned that, and Cecile as well then, the innovation, for example, required in wastewater to really use it as a resource. Sitting here in Africa, I often wonder how it is that we can now, you can travel to space on a whim for an evening and see the planet from afar, but we haven't managed to find solutions to the absolute basics. The fact that we use toilets, or using potable water to flush a toilet and then convey it for kilometers to go and treat it, and it becomes a problem. When I speak to the rest of the world from Africa, and I'm not saying that we don't have our own solutions and clever people who can innovate, but there's been so much investment in innovating things that are not our basic, that don't fulfill our basic needs. That wouldn't it be wonderful if we lived in a world where those solutions can become affordable, even to a village in Africa, that human waste and creating water from human waste becomes an affordable thing, and that is a priority in the world, rather than water and sanitation just being something that most people in the developed world anyway take for granted.
So, Madam Minister, I just point out that there are these places that do that. Look a little north at the Swachh Bharat program in India, the largest country in the world. There was political leadership at the very top to really deal with the sanitation issue. There have been issues, don't get me wrong, no program is perfect, but clearly there was political leadership there, and communities were mobilized, technical experts were put in to manage that effort, and there is a significant achievement there, and it's good to see that now, following on from sanitation, there's a major effort looking at water too. So I think there are cases around the world, even in Africa. If you look at efforts in Uganda and Kenya and Benin, Senegal, you've seen some real significant policy reforms and political leadership, even in Nigeria, which admittedly is a very difficult environment to work in. If you look at the leadership there in terms of willingness to tackle the water challenges. It's not going to happen overnight, but you've seen that taking place. So I think we've seen places where it's ongoing and can be done. Thanks.
Yeah, and I just want to give another positive example, because you're all sitting in nice offices, but I'm actually sitting at the fecal sludge management fecal sludge treatment plant. It's a bit hard here, but this is in a utility in Indonesia where I am now. And this is really a good performer, and they are building capacity in other utilities around in their area. And that's what we see more and more, that the well-performing utilities, even if they're not yet perfect, they're helping others. The South-South cooperation is really increasing, and we have really high hopes for that in the next 9 years. Thanks.
Okay, I have a couple questions for a few of you. So Joel, why are you so confident when the results of NGOs are short-lived? They're not durable, sustainable. Therefore, we must have success. For access, we must have success today, but tomorrow there is backsliding, and we have to redo previous work and watch access.
So I guess I would challenge the premise that we're always backsliding, and that it's to characterize your point, it's one step forward and two steps back. I would argue on the contrary to that. I think it's often two steps forward and one step back. And we've seen issues where small community groups have initiated things and then it's been picked up at the policy level at the local authority and then actually becomes national policy. So for example, I would argue, picking up on the financing theme, it was the NGO community who really pushed the role of microfinance in water development. And we now see examples all around the world where the microfinance institutions have not only picked up on that, but they've gotten significant financial support from the public sector in terms of revolving funds or results-based finance or other instruments to get that at scale. So I guess I would object to the context that you put it in and said, I think there are examples. Now, certainly things have fallen back in some environments, but that doesn't mean we need to stop trying and move forward. And I think there are a lot of successes out there where the NGO community has provided services, and also I think it's important to note collaborated and in some instances even morphed into more private sector operations for treating this, particularly around sanitation and reuse and some of the things that Robert mentioned in terms of the sanitation in particular being seen as a resource rather than a waste problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel. So William, do you agree that there is a lack of finance for strengthening the enabling environment and service delivery?
I beg your pardon?
Do you agree that there is a lack of finance for strengthening the enabling environment and service delivery?
Yes, of course, from the organization I'm heading, my institution has got a lot of money. And we put up a very big budget. And we think we should be able to finance a big chunk of the water sector. My only problem, and which my organization represents, we are not sure whether the utilities in this region can absorb that money that we have. And even after absorbing it, whether they can use it for the purpose that it is intended for. I think there is a need of putting proper governance frameworks in place. There's a need for capacity building, and there is a need for awareness. People must be aware that yes, there is money, but money must be used for the purpose. Because I've seen in one of the institutions where we gave a lot of money, money was not properly utilized. That's in one. But there's another one, another institution. We gave that institution relatively good money, and they used it very, very well. And they are one of the best performers. So I think it all depends on the framework. If the minister and all the other officials in government, and even the NGOs, if they can help put a proper governance in place, I think there is enough money that can really finance this sector and make it very vibrant. Thank you.
Thank you, William. The next question is for Robert. Do you agree that there is untapped use of repayable finance, including microfinance and blended finance, and resources inadequately targeted towards the poor and vulnerable who are unable to access services?
100%, I agree. Do I need to add any details? Because I think that for me is one area which we are not exploiting. And we are not exploiting because for anything else other than lacking the political commitment to support that. I believe that we have a lot of potential to use repayable finance by enhancing our own self-financing as utilities, but it is not coming. And that is something I would like to see happening much faster and in a more enhanced way for utilities. And that is why I say if you use the utility as central to the development of the water and sanitation service within its area, these things, these alternatives and these alternative finance becomes very clear for the utility to use. And many of them, the ones I've interacted with in my many visits to the countries we support, they actually agree, but they always say nobody is ready to put their hand down to support the utility to access repayable finance. Yet it is there. And I agree with Marike mentioned about money from capital markets and all that. I've seen in one country, we have been trying to get capital market financing. They have been trying to get capital market financing for the last 4 or 5 years. They have not been able. And you wonder, and all the framework conditions are there. They are just missing the political commitment. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Marika, why are you so positive when your aid agency spends so little on capacity building? Your projects have limited and short durations and not enough time for proper capacity building.
Yeah, I'm so positive because we're also learning. And indeed, it's a good point because we are trying to be involved in longer term projects because you're totally right. If you're just there for a short term, you may take the wrong decisions. What we also do more and more, and that's why I'm also so positive, is that we cooperate with others and that we work much more demand driven because, of course, as an international agency, we know a lot and we're able to share knowledge and to use good practices from one project to another, but it's not us leading the change. It should be the local authorities, utilities, water organizations. So that's where we are learning, and we see that there is major progress to be made if we work in that way all together. And I'm also doing this because I am a positive person and I really want to make sure that in 9 years' time we are in a different world. Does that answer your question, Marika?
A little bit, yeah. So you're the agency that has the purse string. So how are you going to maintain that there's going to be sustainability and continued capacity building with your project?
Yeah, no, indeed, because indeed we can ask, can you report in a certain way and put in certain indicators? But as I said, and then maybe to emphasize, we are building projects when it's really demand driven, and there needs to be a certain local leadership. If we work with a certain utility, we of course test if the utility is able to make a change. So there are certain conditions, and if these conditions are there, it will work, even if we are not there after 4 or 5 years.
Okay. And you currently have projects that you've put in place that are evidence of this.
Of course, many.
Okay, great. Does anybody else want to jump in? Go ahead, Joel. Oh, no? Okay. I have another, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, the minister doesn't know when to take a foot out of her mouth. But when I hear you speak, I'm thinking that, you know, scale does make things easier. And I know Joel mentioned the example of India, and I'm not quite sure who's on the call, so I don't want to, in the audience, I don't want to create a political fiasco by speaking about it. But I did mention the fact that I don't always think that reporting is 100% honest, and politicians do tend to oversell what they can achieve. But the level of scale is important. You know, I think in my country, approximately 1 in 8 people, at least, probably more than that, live in informal settlements. So that's close to 10 million people who are in need of a better life. And that number is growing all the time. So to do things at scale just is a challenge. And I hear you say that, you know, finance might not be the problem, but my country has such a backlog in infrastructure maintenance, as is evidenced by our energy problems now. And those infrastructure maintenance problems go to all our infrastructure, whether it's transport infrastructure and water and sanitation. And it's keeping society going. I think over time, our governments have taken on probably more roles than would have been better left to the private sector. But if I look at the billions that are required to renew and refurbish existing infrastructure, not to mention the requirement for new infrastructure due to migration and population growth, and just to provide proper shelter for all the informal housing, on top of the fact that climate change has meant that our water resources in my country are far less secure than we would like them to be, which requires huge investment in additional water supply schemes. And those will be, I'm sure, the easiest to finance, because we'll go into either PPPs or long-term takeoff agreements where we will really commit our country to paying them back. But it is a huge ask all at the same time. And there seems to be so much uncertainty in the country, and there is always political uncertainty. And I'm taking you into my confidence. Please don't tell the president that I said all this. But we have a lot to do. And just amongst us ministers, we argue about what is the main priority for us, and a lot of their metrics may not be part of the SDGs. And while intrinsically they agree that water and sanitation is the absolute most basic of basic human rights and requirements for life, it is not easy, and it is going to take a long time. And perhaps when I retire as a minister, I will be best served to join an NGO and go and work on a small scale project, because I think that the successes that you often get out of smaller towns rather than cities, and at a community level, is absolutely inspiration. And so for me, part of the problem is to scale it up and to keep the optimism going at a national level, where the budgets that you require are just so large that you know you're not going to achieve everything that you feel that you need to within the next political term. Thanks, Marika.
Marika, can I come? Can I have an easier question for the minister? I'm sorry, but you've raised an important point. First of all, on your point about the reliable data that's being reported and the results, I certainly hear what you're saying. I understand that, but I do think the political will that's been put in place in many of the places I cited earlier is a major factor. Whether we're achieving 100% or 90%, that's all things that can be looked at the local level. But that leadership and that willingness to take this on, I think, is the main point that we're seeing and we're advocating. I want to touch on what you've raised, and I'm surprised we haven't talked about it very much here, but that's climate change and the role of water, and particularly the role of water, beyond wash. We know most water is used in agriculture. We know the use of water security, the issue of water security is central to the climate change debate. We know that most of the disasters attributed to water or to climate change that are water related, whether they be droughts or floods. And we know that women are disproportionately affected by that. They make up almost half of the workers in the agriculture sector. We've seen the workforce globally seems to be about 43% women. We know that 1/4 of the economic activity actively women working are working in the agriculture sector. And there's some thought out there that the increased attention on climate change and the role that water is playing in that makes it a little easier to get the political will that we've been talking about. And from where you're sitting, I'm just wondering whether you and some of the other leaders, particularly from the donor community, see climate change and the relationship with water. And I don't necessarily mean with WASH, but water writ large. Do you see that as an opportunity, and is there a way to get traction? Thanks.
And may I just have a go at it so that Gisela, our minister, has a little break as well? No, it's a good question. And I was thinking about it before this debate, because of course, climate change and what's happening now is making the awareness of what we're all trying to do here. It makes it bigger, much bigger. And people see, of course, that water is at the core of all SDGs. But in practice, the pressures on water resources will only get bigger and more unpredictable. So I think on certain elements we are all working on, being it awareness, very important, maybe innovation, it may give a boost, but on others it may become more difficult to solve the things that we are already doing. Thanks.
Okay, I have 2 more questions. One is going to be for Robert. How do we persuade you of the utilities and service providers and their capacity to play the role and the importance of investing in them and get them off the obsession with infrastructure?
Unfortunately, it will be very difficult to persuade me and even the organization I represent. What will happen is that that is something that you can say it can be imposed, because we seem to be going round and round. While we talk about the importance of the utility, we are actually not directing resources towards supporting the utility. That will be going forward one of the conditions I'll have to put, that you have to fund a significant amount of money through the utility, and also going forward, step by step, the utility takes over the investment responsibility in its area. That, I'm afraid that we'll have to put it as a condition, because if you look at many of the countries which we support, the big infrastructure is very attractive for obvious reasons if you have lived in those countries. But it is not going, yes, it is helping, but there is no balance between the big infrastructure and what the utility actually needs at that particular point in time. And that is why we have big infrastructure that has a disconnect between service coverage. So I'm afraid at this point, I can only say that you have to be a condition from my side that we have really to support the utility in its programs, in as much as we know and understand the importance of the big infrastructure. Otherwise, it will not happen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and the last question is for Cecile, and it's a thought question. Hi, as the SDG6 coordinator in South Africa, and looking more specifically at 6.1 and 6.2, we will achieve 70% and 80% safely managed achievement, respectively. South Africa has initiated many initiatives to accelerate over the next 9 years, including the implementation of the National Water and Sanitation Management Plan and the National Sanitation Plan Fecal Sludge Management Strategy. I believe we will achieve the 2030 goals. I really do. But we need a mindset change by all stakeholders to roll our sleeves up, adopt a positive attitude, and make it happen. It is achievable. We just make sure that it happens. How much do you believe that a positive mindset and leadership is key to making it a success? Mandela once said, "It's only impossible until it is achieved."
Thank you, Barika, for this very interesting question. I think achievement is the key here. The outcome, the impact, the achievement, and having a positive mindset is also a key. Being positive and trustful that by working together and we can achieve the goal. It's important to give equal opportunity and to trust equally the different stakeholders. And always think, does that help us go towards the goal? So we had discussions about government, about regulation, about whether we are for or against subsidies. But I think each time we should think about, does this help us towards the goal? Very often, our indicators of success are output indicators or evaluation indicators to show that we succeed, and we rarely do an in-depth analysis of what should we do differently. So I think this is the most important thing that should be changed on realistically, maybe going more to the field, speaking more with the beneficiaries, speaking more with the operators, whether at utility level or the private entrepreneurs, and asking them, well, what has changed? What are the impact of our programs and what would you do differently? And I think if we listen more to these people, then and we speak more to each other, then we can achieve the goals. But sometimes I feel that our reporting frameworks and our reporting are very formal and not always addressing the right questions and the right challenges. Thank you, Barika.
Thank you, Cecile. Any last comments from our panelists?
If I can perhaps just respond to Joel, I wasn't sure whether the question was aimed at me, but about climate change and whether it should be easier to find funding for projects in the face of climate change. I think, unfortunately, the impacts of climate change are felt in such varying degrees around the world, and the ones that will kill us are moving quite slowly. So the temperature doesn't just suddenly increase by 5% because it's the 1st of January or whatever. So, and the human response just tends to be that we focus on what is urgent in the moment. And as soon as the urgency passes, there are other urgencies that come up. So of course, we try to never let a good crisis go to waste here in my country. And when there is a drought or a flood, we do try to build back better. We do try to take the opportunity to implement our long-term plans of infrastructure and get the funding for it. But again, it's a bit of a resource thing, isn't it? Because there just never is enough capacity to address absolutely everything at the same time. And I think that especially as we are aiming to not only reach the SDG6 target, we are also, as a country, trying to reach all the other targets. And perhaps one of my main issues with general goals and targets is that it does force you to eat the elephant in bite-sized pieces, even though I don't eat meat. I just want to mention that. So elephants should rather be kept whole. But to manage complex problems, we do tend to break them down in manageable pieces, which in the end may mean that we achieve separate individual goals, but society hasn't necessarily improved much. And what I try to do as minister as well is not just focus on water and sanitation metrics, but on transformational societal goals instead. And it is an enormous task that all of us face. And I'm not quite ready to say that all of you have convinced me that I'm wrong. And God forbid that my country is the only one who doesn't reach the SDGs by 2030, because I'm sure that people will remind me of the conversation that we had. So I would just like to extend my hand in friendship, and hopefully I shall get the opportunity to interact with each of you in assisting my country in how to achieve our goals. Marika, I think I will be first to knock on your door. Thanks, Marika.
And may I just add, because I'm still very much respectful of all the challenges of the minister and all of you, but I want to quote Vanessa Nakato from Uganda. We know her from the climate actions, and she urges all the leaders to leave their comfort zone. So let's do that in achieving SDG6.
Just one final comment from me. It's about the issue that came up on climate change. As much as I look at climate change as an existential threat, in the countries which we work on, I think there are more proximate threats that we are kind of either they are not being dealt with enough, or climate change is overcrowding. And this is the other two changes we talk about: the land use change and the population change in terms of urbanization. To me, these are more serious threats than climate change for now, because then countries would be able to be addressing problems within their own context. But climate change, fine, but we have more serious problems, and this will also impact on how we deal with climate change.
Could I please suggest that we prove that achieving SDG6 is not impossible, and that with a positive mindset, we can change together. So I urge all of you to come to this country where SDG6 is so far unlikely to be achieved, and to unite all our efforts, dear financial organization, private sector providers, financial organizations, NGOs, and of course us, the water and sanitation utilities. We are very much ready to come and collaborate with the honorable government and minister here to undertake activities and to make it possible to achieve WASH SDGs targets in water, sanitation and hygiene by 2030. I think we should commit.
Okay, thank you, Cecile.
Marika, I just wanted
Joel.
to reinforce that and also stress, please create the opportunities and listen to people in the communities, women at all levels, in the NGO part of this, in local government, in utilities, in climate action groups, and certainly at the political leadership level. And Madam Minister, we support you and know you will take positive vibe from this whole thing and charge on and help us solve this problem. So thank you for your patience and understanding and your leadership.
With the right frameworks and the political leadership, I can assure you money will be available. Thank you.
William, any last words?
Yes, of course, I want to thank you for having invited me for this discussion. I mean, with a lot of money available, I know there's a lot of money available, but we must make sure we look at our governance frameworks. Really, if we don't tackle the issue of corruption, if we don't tackle the issue of regulation, if we are not able to build the capacities we need to tackle the problems we have on site, if we are not able to collaborate with one another and even benchmark from those best practices elsewhere, certainly we'll have a problem in achieving the SDGs. But I do hope that with the commitment of the minister, the commitment of the NGOs, and also the commitment of my other big institutions with lots of money, we should be able to drive the sector forward. But please, Honorable Minister, don't give up. We're also not giving up. We hope that all put in place, we should be able to achieve the goal that we all want: safe water for all and sanitation for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That ends our panel discussion for today. As you've all said, it's important for us to work together to achieve SDG6. And as Marika said, that looking at each other's roles and from a different perspective is something that's important. And that's what all of our panelists did today. We took on a role that was different from themselves and argued a point. And this has been an engaging and experimental and enriching discussion. I'd especially like to thank you for taking your time and attention, which you gave both generously today. And if you've enjoyed our online lecture series and panel discussions and would like to help us out more, please consider making a donation on our website at rockblue.org. We're always looking for new topics and diverse panelists, which are central to our own values and critical for developing solutions to challenges we face in the WASH sector. Also, please help us improve our future webinars by completing a Zoom survey that will appear when you close the Zoom app. And Peter, I'll leave it to you to close the event.
Thanks, Marika. And I feel like I owe everyone on this panel discussion a favor after putting you through this role-playing exercise, because none of us are actors. None of you are actors or actresses. You're professionals in your space working in WASH. And so first of all, thank you for everything that every one of you has done in WASH and associated with SDG6. You know, you really have a lot of my respect for doing that, but also for jumping on this call and doing this webinar as actors. It wasn't easy, but it definitely solicited thoughts and ideas that I haven't heard before, and a lot of other people, both who are attending now and who will watch this later, who will be able to hear. It was provocative, and I think we have to ask these questions. So anyway, to all of you, all the panelists, my sincere gratitude for you doing this. And I know I owe you a favor. You can collect on it later. For the attendees, thanks for attending. I hope you got a lot out of this. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay working on SDG6. Bye, everybody.